Hi, I'm Tony Bowen and welcome to my Corn Country Rails. In this video, we're going to take a look back at the original Corn Country Rails railroad from 10 years ago. This layout was in my basement for about 14 years, from the time my wife and I built our house in 1998 until early 2013. At that time, I was at the point where this railroad had served its purpose. I enjoyed the railroad, but there were things about it that needed to be kind of updated or changed. The one thing was I really had wanted to go from a DC layout to a DCC layout. And I had thought about reworking the whole railroad and the wiring. But at the same time, I also wanted to expand. And with a single deck layout, I just didn't feel that the current layout was going to get me there. So in January of 2013, the railroad came down. A neat opportunity that opened up to me was in the summer of 2010, after we had had an NMRA regional convention. My layout was photographed by Cody Grivno, and I wrote an article regarding the layout, and it was a great collaborative effort to get it published in How to Model the 1950s, which was a summer publication that came out in the summer of 2011 on the layout. So at the end of December 2012, during my Christmas break, I invited close friends and operators of Corn Country Rails to operate the layout one last time before I would start dismantling it in January of 2013. So when it came to dismantling the old railroad, I wanted to save all the switches I could, and I want to say there was about 120 or 125 switches on the former layout. I know that I only ruined about 4 of them when it came time to removing them. But the whole idea was to repurpose those switches onto the new layout. The same was true with the lumber. All the 1x4s I wanted to repurpose into the new layout. So essentially pulled the trees, left the flex track, but any of the other scenery and stuff, I figured I would be doing something different with. It could come up. And so essentially the sheathing went to the landfill, but all the 1x4s, all the legs, all that found a new home on the current layout. So by the end of January 2013, the railroad room had no layout in it. This gave me a great time to patch some damage to the walls, fill in some holes where the track used to go through, and then repaint the room to get it prepared for the new layout. So by March of 2013, I was ready to start putting some benchwork up. And so my oldest decided she was going to help me, and so I put up just a small section of 6-foot benchwork. I consider myself to be a really good visual learner, but I just had to have some benchwork put up so I could see the height, if I liked it, the depth of the models. And so I just put these 2 pieces up just to kind of give me the feel of, is this really what I'm going to be happy with, before I got any further along. Now, as I was building benchwork, the nice thing was I had also thinned the herd of my collection. Locomotives that were not going to be worth putting decoders into, freight cars that I either had duplicates of or were out of my era, I ended up turning around and selling. The beauty of it was, what I sold, I was able to turn around and buy my DCC system, which was great. But I continued building benchwork throughout the early spring, and I built basically 6-foot false walls of using 2x4s, and then with my 1x4s, I just cantilevered them out, leaving me benchwork that was 12 inches on depth on each side, but being supported by that kind of false wall made up by 2x4s in the center. When it came to the last peninsula, this is where I finally had to break down and buy some 1x4s. And the day I wanted to build it, of course it rained, so I had to put the false wall together on the garage floor and then carry it in. And so once it was in and attached to the floor and that, then I could still cantilever out with the new 1x4s that I cut. and continue building the benchwork. Nice thing with this layout is, some things I learned from my old layout is I want to have larger aisleways so people could get around. And so I did that for the most part with only having one little area that was kind of a pinch point, but so far has not proved to be a real problem yet. In addition, when I had some homosode or spare plywood, I would also lay up there and just kind of get a feel for some track designs. I was wanting to utilize my space of what would be the Grinnell yard as best I could, and so this gave me a really good chance to kind of monkey around and configure, hey, how would this yard look best to maximize the most use I could get out of the space. Once the majority of the benchwork was up, it was moving towards getting the backdrop up. So I bought some 4x8 masonite, ripped it on the table saw, had a good friend help me because obviously these pieces are 8 foot long. Some of them were going around the end of peninsulas and that. But turned out really good. Made the room kind of now seem very small because at first you could see all the way from the front of the room to the back of the room. And then once that masonite's up there, all of a sudden you were like, hey, this is coming together. There's really going to be some distance between the towns and breaking up the scenery. And so I was real happy with how the backdrops turned out. When it came to actually putting the plywood down, my approach was a little different on this layout from my last. My last layout I had used homosode on top of plywood. This time I was going to give the try of plywood with styrofoam and then glue cork roadbed right on top of it. Also, I had used a lot of Sanborn maps for where industries would be and a lot of pictures that I had to try to represent somewhat freelance prototype of the area I was modeling. And so this worked out really well. I would lay the plywood down, cut it, then I would take that same piece of plywood out, lay it on top of the styrofoam, outline it with Sharpie, cut it, and then come back, adhere the plywood, glue the styrofoam on top, and just keep on moving down. And then essentially once I started drawing with a Sharpie where the main line would be, I was laying the main line, and then I came back and would cut in a lot of where my sidings and spurs and that would be. And so it worked out really well for the most part. Well, everything up to this point was moving great with the new layout until all of a sudden you couldn't get flex track from Atlas. I think all of us who were in model railroading at the time remember what a pinch it was to try to find any kind of track coming out of Atlas. And so luckily I had a friend that unfortunately his dad had passed on, but he had a whole bunch of flex track that he had been buying through the years, and he basically said, here, you can have it if you want it. And so the railroad could continue to keep making progress forward in laying track. At the same time, I was able to start putting structures on the layout to kind of get a feel for where they were going to be. Some structures I thought, nope, I'm going to get rid of them, and I could continue to move forward there as well. And then obviously running those bus wires, running those feeders to actually get the layout up and running was a big thing. Because at this point, I was only doing short little sections of track, but hadn't seen the whole railroad run at all at this point. So here I am moving on almost a full year on the new layout. Yet I don't have anything to connect the two decks. I had been looking at different types of helix systems and also thought about just building my own, and found a gentleman who was selling these on eBay, his helix kits. And I thought, you know what? The time and the money is going to be about the same. It's easier for me to just buy a kit. So I ordered one in this March of 2014, thinking, hey, it'll get here. I can start installing it that summer when I'm off from school for summer break. Well, the first kit arrives and the box is torn up. There's pieces that are broken and that. The gentleman was very good about saying, hey, just send it back. I will send you a new helix kit. No problem. Sent it all back. The problem was I didn't get the new kit until September. And of course, school was already back in session. And so the ideas of having this helix built during the summer, well, that didn't happen. And so instead it got built in the fall of 2014. The helix may appear to be double track when in reality it is not. Kind of the old adage, what goes up must come down. Well, trains that are on the upper deck must find a way to come down and vice versa for going the opposite direction. So by that fall, I was able to host my first operating session. However, the operating session wasn't so much whether cars got to their destinations or that. It was more of a shakedown session of the layout. I had crews basically pinpoint things that weren't working so that I could take care of those before any type of ballast, any type of scenery basically got laid on the layout. And let me tell you, it was well worth it because I could go back and fix all those things prior to destroying any kind of scenery in that. So I would highly recommend that to just do a shakedown session and find that your track work and everything is bulletproof. So I hope you've enjoyed kind of this recap of the building of Corn Country Rails, and always stay tuned to my other videos and how-tos, and thank you for watching. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.